What's going on, everybody? It's Monday. Mondays are the days where we talk about your responses to my question to all of you from the last week, and then I ask you the question for this coming week. What a great way to start the week, right? We got the work week starting up. Hopefully we're watching this during work, right? And something to think about. What would you do in each of these situations? So what I've got for you today, I think is a really good question, but the way that you all responded and the answers that everybody gave to last week's question was really good. I try to narrow down some of the responses that I highlight. It was very hard to narrow these ones down. There were at least a dozen that I felt like I should include, but the video would have been 2 hours long. So I narrowed it to just a little over a handful of the answers that kind of jumped out at me for one reason or another. So first off, let's remind ourselves of what last week's question was right here.
If you had $500 to spend on sports cards right now, what would you buy and why would you buy it?
Wouldn't that be sweet if somebody just said, here's $500, go buy something with it at a card show, at the National, on sports cards. That would be very, very cool. So again, I'm just going to highlight a few of them, but let's get right after it. Let's look at the first response that I wanted to talk about right here.
With $500, I would look to buy a low-grade SGC graded copy of a 1934 Gaudy #1 Jimmy Fox for two reasons. One being, I want a playing days card of one of the greatest hitters in baseball history. The other reason being, I am looking to add a great #1 card to my vintage collection. Now, if we look at this card, it is a beautiful card, and it is the same image as his 33 Gaudy just a year before. And the thing about this card that's especially cool is you can kind of see his swing, but it is a #1 card. And so it's the very first card in the set. And you can see an SGC 1 is $238 or so is the most recent one. And obviously there are going to be some that are going to sell for more than that in a higher grade or, kind of depending on the condition of it. This one's a little round, but in a 1. But so if you had $500, you could probably get a pretty decent 2 or so.
Now, I think that there's a point that's made with this comment that we can't just slide right by. We have to stop and go, oh yeah, that's an interesting point. See, remember when kids were collecting these cards, well before anyone thought they were going to become valuable, they collected the set pretty much in numeric order. They would collect their favorite players, their team sets of the team that they liked, or they would put them in number order. And so when a card was the #1 card, right? Like the Andy Palfko in the 52 top set, or the 34 Gaudy, the Jimmy Fox, or the Whitey Ford in the 51 Bowman. The thing that makes that special is those cards on the top and the bottom took so much punishment because most people wrapped them with rubber bands. So those cards are beat up. Similar to the last card in those sets, like the 52 top set, the famous Eddie Matthews rookie card is a really expensive card because it's the last card in the set. So as collectors, a lot of us aren't just interested in the quality players that we like, the beautiful cards. A lot of people are also into the rarer cards. And finding even a decent #1 card from some of these iconic sets is not as easy as you'd think. So it's not just Jimmy Fox. It's Jimmy Fox and it's the number one card. I think it's a great pick. Let's look at the next one.
First, I've been eyeing a 1950 Bowman Marion Motley, which I would be able to get around a 6 for that price. Motley is one of the first great African-American football players, and his Bowman rookie card is in the iconic category for vintage football. I may also pick up a 1976 Walter Payton. That card has come down in the prices, as 6s were about $450 in that range a year ago, and now can be had for about $400. So if we take a look at the first one, the Marion Motley, this is a really cool card, and it is a very, very classic football set. If you're into vintage football, that 50 and 51 Bowman is a really good place to look as far as two of the better sets. Now, this one is an SGC 5.5, and you can get it for under $500. So it is a doable one, and for one of the better early African-American players in vintage football, that's a very popular card. And if we look at the Walter Payton, a lot of people in my age range, in our 40s or early 50s, Walter Payton was kind of like the guy growing up. He was the running back, breaking records, breaking tackles, very, noted player for a really good Bears team in the middle 80s. And so I totally would understand why someone would go with this choice.
All right. Two more. Those are two great choices, right? When we think about collecting, again, we like to collect the players that we like. We like to collect the players from the teams that we like. We like to collect the rare stuff, but then there's also collecting the important stuff. And sometimes a player crosses over from just being a great player or on a team that we really like to root for. They become important into the sport, into society at that time. And that's what I think both of these cards do. See, the Marion Motley, if you look at that card, it's an iconic set, but he's one of the first true standout African-American players in football. And that's important. Just like those guys are important in baseball. The early African-American players who were tremendous in baseball, like, Campanella, Satchel Paige, Jackie Robinson, Larry Doby, Hank Aaron, those guys are important for more than just being great players. And when you think of football in the 1980s, and a lot of us that are getting back into collecting right now, in our 40s, in our 50s, when we were growing up, when we were younger, those 85 Bears, those years with watching Walter Payton initiate contact with defenders and take on those hits and go on those wild runs and break records was a lot of fun to watch, and he's a very memorable player from those early to mid 80s. So he's not just a great player, he's sort of a symbolic player of football of that time. And this is before all of the passing that's going on now. This is when there was a lot of running the ball, and he was the workhorse. Two great choices. Let's look at the next response that I thought was pretty interesting.
I would find a dealer with vintage unopened wax and bargain to $500, I think would be reasonable, for a graded 1973 Topps baseball wax pack. I'd get a Series 1 if I could find one. Then I'd sit and stare at that pack, dreaming of a Crisp, Clemente, Oliva, or Aaron, whoever may be in it, for 5 to 6 months until my birthday. Then I'd crack the slab and slowly open it with my kids around me to share the fun. 73 was the first year I bought packs of cards as a kid. Coming home from the grocery store shopping with my mom, after spending my 10 cents allowance on one of those packs as an 8-year-old, and then opening it with my brother as he opened his was one of my most joyful things I remember. I still remember getting Clemente, Oliva, and Aaron and being so excited. But no matter the contents, I think it would bring so much joy 50 years later. And here is that pack. And the good news is that you can get them for under $500. This one for about $324. It isn't sealed, so you don't have it authenticated. You don't know for sure if it's been tampered with. So there is a risk, and I'm sure if it was a graded and sealed one, it would probably be a little bit more expensive. But it is certainly possible.
Now this response, that's like borderline poetic. That like makes me want to start a GoFundMe account to get him a pack of cards. I mean, the memories that a lot of us have from opening cards with our family members, with our brothers or our sister or our dad or our mom or whatever it is, however you got your packs of cards when you were just a kid collecting. There's something so special about that. It's a time in our life that was a lot different than it is now, that we likely have a lot of good memories from. And wanting to relive those memories for just a moment is a really special thing. And that's one of the reasons, quite frankly, that I love cards so much, is that period of time from the late 80s, for until I'm, in college pretty much, where I was heavy into collecting, was such a fun time. It was such a memorable time. And being able to have some nostalgia from that is really cool. And it's one of the reasons that I think a lot of us have enjoyed collecting as adults, is it's kind of that nostalgia from our childhood. So the thought of opening packs, the same sorts of packs that you did as a kid, I totally get. I know my brother enjoys this. I know he went back a couple of years ago and he bought a box of 87 Tops. And then he bought a couple of boxes of 88 Fleer. And he knew that those cards were not going to have the value of what he paid for them. But it was just the process of opening the same cards from the same packs that we did as a kid that's so special. And sometimes it's more than just having a card that's valuable. It's experiencing what we experienced in a time of our life that we no longer have, but want to just experience for a moment once again.
With $500, I'd aim for a presentable 1953 Topps satchel page. Every now and again, a nice low-grade copy can be had for $500. If I couldn't acquire a page, a presentable 1959 Bob Gibson rookie or 1951 Bowman Ted Williams would be the next targets. I could also be convinced to part with $500 free dollars for a presentable, low-grade 1953 Bowman Pee Wee Reese. So here is that satchel page, that iconic card from the 1953 Topps set. And even in a 1, it's going to cost you right around that $500 mark. And a couple of years ago, it was more than that. So it has come down a little bit, and it is more affordable now. The 59 Bob Gibson, another terrific choice. The pink background, it's obviously a high number, so that adds some value to it. This was actually a fairly popular response in this particular video, and for a 3, it's just around that $500 mark. The 51 set is so well known for the Mays and the Mantle rookies, but there's also a really cool Ted Williams, and you can get a decent one. You can get one right around a 4 or so in that $500 range. And then the very iconic 53 Bowman Pee Wee Reese, which so many of us recognize. Again, you'd have to get a pretty low copy, something like a 3 or so. to stay under the $500 mark. You might be able to get up to a 4 maybe, or a 3.5, but it's an expensive card.
See, the thing I love about this answer is that's something I would do. That's something I would say. It's like, well, I most would want this, but if that couldn't work out, then I'd also like this. And if that doesn't work out, then I could also go for this. And if those three things didn't work out, I could go for this. It's like, basically, there's more than I want than I can ever pay for. And there's so many different cards that I'd like to obtain that to say just spend $500, I can't just pick one thing that I would spend the $500 on. I have to kind of have a few backup plans just in case, because I like cards so much I couldn't just pick one. So I totally relate to this answer. I'd like that, but if that doesn't work, I'd take that. I'd be okay with that too. I'd also be okay with that. That is so me. It's unbelievable. So, and by the way, all four of those choices are really, really good choices. I'd love to add any of those cards to my collection as well. So I totally related to that response. And I'm like, I have to include this. I have to include that one.
I would pick up a 1933 Gaudi Tris Speaker PSA 3. This is an absolutely gorgeous card, and I believe it is greatly undervalued. The bright yellow is beautiful. There is that 33 Gaudi Tris Speaker, and it really is a good-looking card. It's got the old school hat on, no batting helmet as he's swinging, as they obviously did in those days. And for a PSA 3, you can get one for just under $400. So it is certainly possible to pull this off. And, Tris Speaker's rookie card is actually in the T206 set. But, so this is, a few years later, but a very cool card, a very recognizable card. And I have to agree, a very beautiful card.
At the end of the day, if you're a vintage collector, like a lot of us are, the cards are more than just cards. They're small pieces of art. They're relics of our past, of our history. We don't just like the history of the game and learning about and reading about and thinking about those historical great players, but we also like the artifact. We really love history of the game, of the artifact, of the relic, of our society. So the art aspect of cards and antique cards, I mean, the 33 Gaudi set is almost 100 years old. It's a big part of it. It's a big part of why a lot of us love vintage cards. So it would be impossible for me to go through talking about vintage cards without talking about the appreciation of the beauty. Just like was mentioned earlier with the 53 Satchel Paige. It's a beautiful piece of art. And it's also of such a historically significant figure in the game that we all enjoy. So we have to never forget that these little pieces of cardboard with pictures of guys playing sports on them, they're not just little pieces of cardboard with pictures of guys playing sports on them. They're also beautiful pieces of art and historical artifacts, just like is mentioned with that Tris Speaker.
I would definitely buy the best eye appeal graded rookie card of Bob Gibson that I could find, as he was my all-time favorite pitcher when I was a kid, and of course he still is to this day. My son and I met him about 30 years ago at a huge local card show, and he was very nice and soft-spoken, and he let us stand next to him to get a picture with him, which he graciously signed. I will never forget that day because I was able to experience that memorable moment with my son. And there again is that Bob Gibson. Now, this was a popular response in this video, which I think is very interesting since I think it's an undervalued card in the hobby. I mean, a lot of people are saying, yeah, that's one of the cards I'd go for if I had $500 free dollars, but the card remains fairly affordable. Again, this is a really nice 3 copy for $475. And it is a high number in the 59 set. So fairly interesting to me.
Collecting our favorite player from our childhood. I mean, it's one of the cornerstones of the hobby. Even if the guy that was your favorite player from your childhood is not a particularly valuable player, or he's one of the greatest pitchers of all time, like Bob Gibson. I still have a lot of cards from my childhood of players that are not worth a lot. I mean, growing up in Northern California, the San Francisco Giants were the local team, and we would go to a fair amount of games, and I played a lot of shortstop and second base. And I had a thing for Robbie Thompson. I have a fair amount of Robbie Thompson cards because he was the second baseman for the Giants, who were on TV all the time, on the radio all the time, and I was a Robbie Thompson fan. We always have to make sure that we're not just buying the cards of the players that we think are going to go up in value, but we're buying the cards of the guys that we like and that we liked as a kid. That's a big part of it. And how great is it that when you think of Bob Gibson, you're able to think of this memorable day, this memorable experience, meeting him, and he lived up to your expectations. See, I have met a lot of professional athletes, and some of them could not have been kinder. I had several run-ins, not run-ins negatively, several encounters with Mariano Rivera. And the guy was as nice of a human as you could ever imagine. And how cool is it that when you're sitting there talking face to face with Mariano Rivera, you're like, what a great guy. How much does that add to the legacy in your heart for that player who you already admired? When I met Roger Clemens, and I know there's a lot of Roger Clemens haters out there, he could not have been nicer to me. He asked me to come around the table so that my dad could get a picture of me and him next to each other. He shook my hand and he looked me straight in the eye. And he could not have been cooler. What an experience. When I met Ted Williams, and I'm sitting there face to face with Ted Williams, such a nice person. And when you're collecting cards of a guy that you like, and then you have an encounter with that guy, and they live up to everything that you hope that they would be, at least they were in that moment, that is pretty special.
I don't have a Jackie Robinson. I've had chances to pull the string on one many times, but I never did. They were always off center, creased, or just did not look right to me. A nice looking JR lower grade cards for $500 or less are out there, but they sell very quickly. So which one to target would be interesting, but the 56 is a really great one. I love the 55 and the 56. The 56 is usually the most affordable one. So when we look at this great looking card, it also is one of the more affordable. So, you can get one in a 3.5 or so for right around $500. A 3.5, occasionally a 4 will fall under $500. It's rare, but it happens. but this is a terrific choice.
There are players who were great. There are players who weren't great. There are players who are household names, and there are players who helped change society forever. And Jackie Robinson is much more than a really good baseball player who could hit and could steal bases. He's so much more than that. If you ask me who some of the players who will be household names for years and years and years to come, Babe Ruth is going to be a household name. I could ask my daughters or my students right now, who's Babe Ruth? And they'd all know. And they'd all know Jackie Robinson. And that makes you not just a great player, but that makes you historically significant. And I can't think of anybody who's more historically significant in the game of baseball than Jackie Robinson. I think every collection needs a Jackie Robinson card. And for the exact same reasons that are mentioned right there, I don't yet have one, but I absolutely will have one before my collection is complete. Let's take a look at the question for this week that I'm really excited. I'm really interested to hear what you all think about this one. Let's take a look.
Let's say you had access to a time machine and could go back in time to 1985. You were given 5 minutes to give your younger self one piece of sports collecting advice. What advice would you give?
So for just a moment, you don't have to be Michael J. Fox. You don't have to have a flying DeLorean. You don't have to be friends with this crazy scientist to go back in time. But if you could go back to 1985 for just a minute, and you had just a handful of minutes to give yourself some sports card collecting advice, what would you say? What would you say? And don't come back with me and just say, hey, save up and buy a couple of really sweet 1952 Mickey Mantle cards. Don't give me that. What would you say? Let me know. I look forward to it.